Hello, welcome. We are addressing the A Tale of Two Republics. Okay. And so yeah, we're gonna go ahead and go through that. You'll notice that there's a little bit of uh, it's repetitiveness. You had a similar thesis in the Wars for Independence as you find here. All right. So as I open this up, let's see here. A Tale of Two Early Republics is right here. Okay. So at any rate, it begins by reiterating what was stated in the previous assignment, and that is that the Latin Americans, right? They really addressed the controversial um, institutions and practices and ideas that the Norte Americanos, the gringos in the U.S. were not willing to address. Right, they kicked them those issues down the road to be addressed later. So one of them is right political equality. Everyone politically entitled to citizenship, and later on with our 14th Amendment, all the rights, privileges, and protections thereof. We're far from that. At the time of the founding fathers, they allowed citizenship to be decided by each state. Yeah. Then also our republic, when you look at the Constitution, is fairly conservative. The federal government in Article 1, Section 8 has a lot of powers over the states. Okay. And then when you look at House reps, senators, president and vice president, and as well as perhaps separately as a fourth category, their chosen cabinet. And then you have Supreme Court justices. Of those five, how many were elected by citizens? One, the House reps. That's it. Okay. So very, very conservative republic that we established. So the fact that it is more democratic of a republic now, that was the result of evolutionary changes throughout U.S. history. So they're pretty darn conservative. They certainly did not address slavery. They allowed each state to decide, and so they gave a sanction for slavery in a fugitive slave clause, in a property and contract clause, etc. And then also, of course, in the infamous 3/5 of a person phrase that you find in the Constitution. Whereas in Latin America, you had people like Nariño, Francisco de Miranda, Miguel Hidalgo in Mexico, right? They were for more democratic government. They were for political equality of men of all colors and ethnic backgrounds. And they even dabbled with redistribution of land from the rich to the poor. Okay. They didn't succeed. That didn't really happen on a permanent basis in Mexico, etc. But at least they tried, right? So the argument is that when someone on the very far left or very far right in Latin America was elected to office, it felt like the end of the world as you knew it. It was so antithetical or opposite to your vision of government and society that you couldn't endure it. And so hence there were coups, right? COUP is a blow to the state, military takeover. There were revolutions. And they would scratch the Constitution and write a new one in their image and to their likeness. And then there were civil wars. Okay. And so with the Americans, they didn't have that because, again, the ideological gap between the conservatives and the liberals was not very far at all. So you see the conservatives like Hamilton and John Adams, they wanted a democratic republic with checks and balances. Yes, Hamilton wanted the president to serve for life, and he also contended that the elected reps ought to be filters and filter the foolish ideas out of their constituents and use their own education and wisdom to rule as stewards, like babysitters, of the power that had been invested in them. but he wanted a democratic republic nevertheless. Okay. Also, he and John Adams were abolitionists. That's not very conservative at all, right? Then you go to our liberals. And of course, the main person, the leader of the liberals was Thomas Jefferson. When you look at his notes on the state of Virginia, okay, when he was younger, he had private correspondence with a French friend, and he wrote on a myriad of topics, and he seemed very radical from those writings. But when he's elected in 1800, he did no such thing. He didn't touch slavery. He kept his own slaves, did not even free them at death. He kept Hamilton's economic system intact, as much as he said that he hated it because his Secretary of the Treasury told him that there were too many ties between the federal government and business, that it would have a ruinous effect if he did away with Hamilton's economic system. So even the liberals were okay with the conservative economic system. And so when they acted like it would be the end of the world if the liberal or the conservative, and they especially did that when John Adams went against Thomas Jefferson twice in a row, to Joseph Ellis and to myself subjectively, it was hyperbole. It was strategic exaggeration. They knew they were really not that far from one another. So with that conservative consensus, right, they're able to go to business as usual without coups, civil wars, revolutions, etc. So in doing so, Hamilton's system really took off, right? So get down here. So to encourage industrialization, the Norte Americanos, the Anglo-Americans, right, accomplished the following. The federal executive and treasury department assumed national and state debts with a promise to pay back those owed money. They sold bonds to the rich and made money off of that, as well as taxes. All right. They encouraged European consumption of bonds and bank ties with a constitutionally doubtful national bank. Right, and to provide credit for businessmen. They created their Supreme Court, especially a guy named John Marshall, really defended the rights of businessmen in this country. So America became like known to be a business safe, right? A business friendly nation. They placed import tariffs on competitive goods that came in, forcing Americans to buy American-made products. And in the long run, that helped. They recognized public corporations, which came of age by the 1840s. Right. And they subsidized industries that they claimed were vital to us becoming economically self-sufficient. Hamilton wanted us to produce everything that we need and everything that we want. So we're not economically dependent upon any European, especially nation or businessman. Let's see here. Then they subsidized public works. Public works were basically transportation and communication. And it connected regions and encouraged business growth and trade. So, for instance, they started with turnpikes or privately paid roads. Then the trend went to canals, and then the trend went to railroads. And they're being subsidized by either their state governments or the federal government. And in subsidization, the government meets you halfway and helps carry the costs of business with and for you. Okay. So they connected, like the Erie Canal, connected the Northwest to the Northeast single-handedly by 1825. All right. They made it easy in the States to start a business. Not only with the help of loans to start off with capital, the money to begin with, but also legally. They made it pretty simple to be enfranchised as a business, recognized by your state. Right, and so look at this. Between 1787 and 1860, the national government spent 60 million on roads and canals alone. The state spending almost 10 times as much. Then you had the development of steam, using steam power, and it was first used in the textile or clothing industry. You had the development of interchangeable parts, and that will constitute the beginning of assembly line production. That skilled workers making one product at a time by hand could not compete with. The first factories were usually called mills, and they were in the New England states like Connecticut. And then foreign capital was enticed. You see there, $500 million were invested by Europeans into one industry or another before the Civil War. And hence we developed not only global and interstate and interregional trade, but a major manufacturing sector in the North. Then in addition to that, we acquired land from the natives. All right. And the first government that we tried, it was a confederation, and it failed. They insisted that Virginia and I think a couple other states like Pennsylvania relinquish their Western lands, their title and entitlement to the Western lands. And they insist that they hand it over or sell it to the new federal government. Okay. Then, of course, with the new federal government, they are going to buy at low prices from the native tribes. So a couple of the first states in which that happened were Tennessee and Kentucky. Right? And it won't take long, and Mississippi and Alabama will be added to that list. In the War of 1812, we took much of the Ohio Valley around the Great Lakes from the Red Stick tribes that chose to fight against us with the British in the War of 1812. We were quite vindictive that way. And then you have a contrast. Look at Mexico. In the Republic's first 33 years, 49 administrations came and went. That's insane, right? So that's averaging more than one a year, one administration. The second president, Gomez Pedraza, was overthrown. The third president, Vicente Guerrero, was overthrown and executed. The next one was Bustamante. He was overthrown. The next one was Valentin Gomez Farias, and he was overthrown. Santa Anna put in a new constitution known as the Seven Laws. And then he put in an even more conservative constitution known as the Organic Bases. So Mexico was a bit of a mess. That's Guadalupe Victoria on the left, the first president. The first leader was Agustin de Iturbide, and he declared himself to be Emperor of Mexico. He was overthrown, and they had elections, and Guadalupe Victoria here was elected. He actually served his term, 1824 to 28, but after that, almost no one else did. And that is Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna on the right. In and out of power, just ridiculous number of times. So as you probably know, what I'm doing is I'm setting the stage for the American takeover of the Far West, showing how America was in a position that was powerful enough to do so. And by the way, our population tripled, and the areas that we bought from the natives or took from them: Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio by the Great Lakes, Mississippi and Alabama in the Deep South, and Kentucky and Tennessee in the West are going to experience floods of settlers. And the settlers in those frontier areas are primarily going to constitute the people that go into Mexican Texas. Very ambitious and also very libertarian, anti-government. And that is going to form a combustible situation in Texas. And that's where it all begins. The drama between Mexico and the US is in Texas, arguably. And in California, you could say that the American sense of arrogance and what we'll later call manifest destiny, that it's destined for us to take over and rule from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Pacific, and that those who fall under the American flag should be grateful for such, because they will have an enterprising economy with more opportunities, and because they will have a democratic republic politically to take advantage of. And so in Mexican California, you had a few explorers come in there and write about their experiences of California. You have Richard Henry Dana, who wrote a book called 7 Years at the Mast, like the mast of a ship, in his travels. And he says about California, right? What a beautiful, beautiful land. And he said, how much greater could this land be if in the hands of a more enterprising people? And to me, enterprising is a generic adjective that implies that you're hardworking and that you are innovative. You bring new economic inventions, new ways of production, new products, etc., to the economy. You also had a gentleman who thought at that time that Mexico and US were at war because of a false newspaper article. And he invaded Mexican California, and he militarily did surprisingly well in taking San Francisco and Monterey. When he found out they weren't at war, he gave a formal apology and left. But the United States and the world saw just how vulnerable and how arguably easy Mexican California was for the picking. Right? So at any rate, that's about it for this one. It's not that long, but that's what we're doing here, okay? Is we're making the argument that because of the narrow ideological gap between the left and right in America, they didn't have civil wars or political instability. And because of Hamilton's system, his conservative system, America can grow into the economic giant that it will become. And meanwhile, as in the title, A Tale of Two Republics, right? It hints at a contrast. Mexico was a mess politically, and hence vulnerable in the early to mid 1800s. So it's easy to foresee what happens next. All right. So at any rate, that's all. That's this assignment. I hope this helps. And I apologize for missing the 4 o'clock Zoom. And I wish you well. All right. So you guys take care. Hang in there.